as the terrain upon which these issues are discussed, while leaving little space from which this group can speak or be heard. To ground some of these ideas, I'll introduce a couple of examples that I alluded to earlier. The case of Tennyson Ameil, who stabbed and killed British police officer John Henry. An article was published in the Daily Telegraph on the case the day after Tennyson Ameil was convicted, which was a couple of years after the incident. The article, entitled "Paranoid Schizophrenic Released into Community to Murder," stated that Ameil was described as a highly dangerous man who stopped his medication, and was also described as having an acute episode of paranoid schizophrenia on the day of the murder. In the months before the killing, Ameil is described as believing he had special powers, could predict the future, and had been in contact with aliens who had taken him to another planet. The article also notes that I mentioned before that it's three sprays of CS gas, a hit on the head with a metal pole, and 2 taser stun guns with a 50,000-volt charge to finally overpower the killer. It briefly mentions that Ameil had immigrated to the UK from Nigeria in 2000. First came to the attention of psychiatric services in 2004, and was first diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2005. The article states that according to professionals, Ameil had a long history of schizophrenia. In fact, Ameil was living in the UK for 4 years without contact with the mental health system. It was only a 2-year period between first diagnosis and incident. It is also briefly mentioned that tragically, the heavy cannabis user and drinker developed a distrust for the police because he thought they were involved with his mother's death. After the tragic incident, a spokeswoman from the Bedfordshire London Mental Health and Social Care Partnership at NHS said an investigation had been launched into Ameil's care. After the internal inquiry, a detailed action plan had been put in place to deal with the issues raised, and the trust will take full account of the findings. Even in this brief media representation, the discursive formations operate to represent Ameil with a static history of schizophrenia, evacuated of political and social histories, as a dehumanized substance abuser whose lack of cooperation with the mental health system resulted in the need for 3 sprays of tear gas, a hit on the head with a metal pole, and 2 50,000-volt tasers, as well as life imprisonment. The lawyers, judge, mental health professionals all see this as a case of someone in need of monitoring who fell off the radar and can no longer be allowed to exist with a perpetual surveillance. Ameil was 29 years of age at the time of the arrest in 2007, and his entire history was erased and the representations offered. The voice of Ameil himself is also erased with this representation, and is only referenced for aspects that reinforce the positions of those professionals and disciplines that maintain the notion of this European Occident subject that I was talking about earlier. Through exclusions endemic to their formation. For example, the consolidation of the months prior to the killing where they had limited contact with Ameil to merely drugs and alcohol, thoughts about aliens, etc. These expert positions of legal and professional authority without the capacity to recognize a person within a context or see the space for their voice within their own regime of truth can then only resort to dehumanizing practices that maintain the notion of the other, which rationalize the use of harmful treatment, forced confinement, and the reproduction of colonial forms of violence. When crisis occurs and reoccurs, the regimes of truth conduct internal investigations within their own discursive fields and disciplinary hegemonies. These mechanisms become fixed and dominant, impermeable to criticism, resistant to transformation, and violence continues to thrive. If there was some mention of OB's experience prior to going to the UK from Nigeria, if there was some consideration of the 5-year period in the UK prior to OB's diagnosis, or if there was some elaboration on the circumstances of OB's mother's death, then the possibility and necessity for this recognition in any representation of OB becomes apparent. If we dismiss the political and social histories beyond OB's emigration to the UK, we therefore preclude any analysis of the ancestries of the institutionalized forms of disrespect forged through the violence of colonization and embedded in the ruling disciplines and their discursive regimes of truth. This omission will therefore always avert our gaze from the use of harmful and forced treatments by the mental health system and the ancestries of these practices and erasures, the violence of colonization. The psychiatric regime of truth that dominates the mental health system does not only reproduce violence on racialized people, only disproportionately so, just as the academic field of economics and its technologies have been separated from their colonial authors and social intentions. So too have the technologies and expert disciplines of biomedical psychiatry. In 2007, Howard Hyde was killed when resisting officers that were taking him to get ready for a court appearance at a correctional facility in Nova Scotia. Hyde was a 45-year-old musician with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. He was tasered up to 5 times and pinned to the ground by 3 security guards before he stopped moving and never gained consciousness. The cause of death reported by the coroner was excited delirium stemming from paranoid schizophrenia. The internal inquiry felt that it was a dangerous restraint technique used for too long, and tasers should not be used to restrain people known to be suffering from a mental illness or showing signs of emotional disturbance. The use of a taser up to 5 times, pinning someone to the ground until they lay motionless, and going several minutes without medical aid become only of concern if they are used on a person with a known mental illness, or if the restraint technique is used longer than 3 minutes. The role of expert opinion and the use of violence goes unchanged. Representations of OB and Hyde as a biomedical anomaly allows for those with biomedical expertise to hold authority over the incident, its explanation, and the need for coercion and violence. I am not attempting to represent or represent OB or Hyde here, but rather to suggest that we maybe unrepresent them as a biomedical disorder without a social and political context. To consider the institutionalized discursive practices and disciplinary hegemonies, including the rule of experts and internal inquiries that allow for violence to go unquestioned. This consideration may also pursue the space where OB and Hyde speak for themselves and are heard. I would want us also to reconsider the technologies of violence forged through colonialism that continue to be used today. The use of harmful and forced treatments, the deportation of the racialized mentally ill, the violent erasure of a person's own voice, own history, which are also not transparent, and social and political contexts, and the replacement of these nuances with homogenizing simplifications such as a long history of schizophrenia. I'm suggesting that if we are able to accept that we cannot possibly fully understand this complex history and its heterogeneous validity with the current arrangements of specialized disciplinary expertise, we can prevent ourselves from finalizing a person and condemning them to a determined violent sentence, such as too dangerous for the community or biologically pathological with no cure in sight. We can rehumanize and decolonize our knowledge around mental health and wellness by eliminating the possibility to hear the voices of those who endure the violence that the system itself perpetrates. We deny ourselves any greater understanding and accommodate the divisions between health and mental health that reproduce the other. This precludes the ability for people to help each other in ways that produce outcomes without violence. If we are truly interested in ameliorating the suffering experienced by human beings, then we should be open to analyses that offer suggestions of how we might consider things differently, how we might look to other resources, other sources of knowledge, without a violent intervention of any sort. If we demand that we will not accept violence of any kind for anyone, then the possibility of realizing our common humanity might then be something that could be up for discussion. Thank you.